What Americans actually earn, the middle-class income reality everyone avoids. You think you know what middle class means in America, but the numbers are going to shock you. Right now, millions of Americans are walking around believing they're middle class when the actual data tells a completely different story. Some people earning six figures think they're barely scraping by, while others making half that amount consider themselves comfortable. The confusion isn't accidental, and what I'm about to share with you will completely change how you view your own financial situation and everyone around you. Before we dive into the real numbers, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone casually mentions their salary and you immediately start comparing it to yours? Maybe you felt proud, maybe you felt anxious, or maybe you just felt confused about where you actually stand. That feeling, that uncertainty, is exactly what we're going to eliminate today, because the truth about middle-class earnings in America is buried under layers of misconceptions, regional differences, and frankly, a lot of people not wanting to have honest conversations about money. The Pew Research Center defines middle class as households earning between 2/3 and double the median household income. But here's where it gets interesting. The median household income in the United States hovers around $67,000 annually. That means, technically, middle class ranges from about $45,000 on the low end to approximately $134,000 on the high end. But wait, because that's just the national average, and if you're living in San Francisco or New York City, that $67,000 feels like poverty wages, while in rural Mississippi or Arkansas, it might actually provide a decent lifestyle. Let me break down what's really happening in different parts of the country, because this is where the conversation gets real. In the San Francisco Bay Area, you need to earn over $300,000 as a family to feel middle class. Yes, you heard that right, $300,000. Meanwhile, in places like Oklahoma City or Des Moines, a household income of $55,000 can provide a genuinely middle-class lifestyle with home ownership, occasional vacations, and some savings. The disconnect is absolutely wild. But here's what nobody wants to talk about. The majority of Americans, regardless of what they actually earn, identify as middle class. Studies show that people earning $30,000 a year call themselves middle class, and people earning $200,000 a year also call themselves middle class. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about identity, perception, and honestly, a bit of denial on both ends of the spectrum. The median individual income, not household, sits around $40,000 per year. That's what half of working Americans are making or less. When you factor in that many households have two incomes, you start to see how that 67,000 household number makes sense, but it also reveals something crucial. Single-income households are struggling to maintain what we traditionally consider middle-class status. Let's talk about what middle-class life actually costs today compared to 30 or 40 years ago. In the 1980s, a middle-class family could buy a home for roughly 2 to 3 times their annual household income. Today, that same family needs to spend 5 to 8 times their annual income. And in major metro areas, we're talking 10 to 15 times. College education? It's increased by over 500% when adjusted for inflation. Healthcare costs have tripled. Childcare in many cities costs more than college tuition. The goalposts haven't just moved, they've been launched into another stadium entirely. Here's a reality check that might sting. If you're making the median household income of $67,000, your take-home pay after taxes is roughly $50,000, maybe a bit more depending on your state. That's about $4,000 per month. Now, let's do some basic math that financial influencers often skip. Average rent in the U.S. is around $1,900. Car payment, insurance, and gas, another $600. Groceries for a family, $600. Utilities and phone, $250. Health insurance premiums, $400. We're already at $3,750, and we haven't touched student loans, childcare, savings, entertainment, or any emergency expenses. That leaves $250 for everything else. Does that sound middle class to you? The uncomfortable truth is that what we call middle class today would have been considered working poor or lower middle class a generation ago. The buying power, the security, the ability to weather financial storms, it's all diminished. Yet we cling to the label because admitting otherwise feels like failure, even though the system has fundamentally changed around us. Regional variations create these bizarre parallel realities. A software engineer making $120,000 in Austin, Texas, lives comfortably, saves money, and builds wealth. That same engineer making the same salary in Seattle struggles with housing costs, has minimal savings, and feels financially stressed constantly. Both are technically upper middle class by national standards, but their lived experiences couldn't be more different. Then there's the generational wealth gap that nobody wants to acknowledge in these conversations. Baby boomers and older Gen Xers bought homes when they were affordable, built equity over decades, and many are sitting on substantial wealth through property appreciation alone. Millennials and Gen Z are entering a housing market where starter homes cost $500,000 in many markets, requiring down payments that would take a decade to save, even with disciplined budgeting. The middle-class experience for a 55-year-old versus a 30-year-old is fundamentally different, even at similar income levels. Let's address the elephant in the room about lifestyle inflation and perception. Social media has completely warped our understanding of normal middle-class life. We see influencers and content creators showcasing lifestyles that require $200,000 plus in income, but they're presenting it as relatable, everyday living. The constant exposure to luxury rebranded as necessity has made people feel poor even when they're statistically doing okay. That $67,000 household income feels inadequate when your Instagram feed is filled with European vacations, designer handbags, and renovated homes. The data shows something fascinating about how Americans perceive their economic status. Surveys reveal that most people believe middle class means financial stability, owning a home, being able to retire comfortably, taking annual vacations, and having an emergency fund. By those criteria, fewer than 40% of Americans are actually middle class, despite over 60% identifying as such. The gap between perception and reality is massive. Income inequality has stretched the definition of middle class to a breaking point. The top 20% of earners have seen their incomes grow substantially over the past 40 years, while the middle 60% has seen minimal real wage growth when adjusted for inflation and cost of living increases. The bottom 20% has actually lost ground. What this means practically is that the middle class is hollowing out, with more people sliding into lower income brackets while a smaller percentage climbs into upper income territory. Here's what really matters, though. Individual circumstances matter more than national statistics. A nurse making $75,000 with no debt, a paid-off home, and low cost of living is far better off than a lawyer making $150,000 with $300,000 in student loans, high rent, and expensive childcare. Net worth, debt levels, and cost of living context matter as much or more than gross income. The retirement crisis adds another layer to this conversation. Traditional markers of middle-class status included a pension and the ability to retire with dignity. Today, fewer than 15% of private sector workers have access to a traditional pension. Most rely on 401k plans that they're struggling to fund adequately. Financial experts recommend having 1 times your salary saved by age 30, 3 times by 40, and 6 times by 50. The reality? The median retirement account balance for Americans in their 50s is around $75,000, nowhere near the recommended levels. Tax brackets reveal another hidden truth about middle-class earnings. The federal tax system treats someone making $40,000 roughly the same as someone making $80,000 in terms of marginal rates, with both falling into the 22% bracket for much of their income. Meanwhile, capital gains, the way wealthy people generate income, are taxed at much lower rates. The tax code itself reveals who the system is designed to benefit, and it's not wage earners in the middle income brackets. Benefits and total compensation matter tremendously in this conversation. Someone making $60,000 with excellent health insurance, a generous 401k match, and 4 weeks of paid vacation is in a fundamentally different position than someone making $75,000 as a contractor with no benefits. When we talk about middle-class salaries, we often focus purely on the number without considering the total package. The gig economy and contract work have created a new category of workers who might have middle-class incomes on paper but lack the security and benefits that traditionally defined middle-class employment. A freelancer earning $80,000 sounds great until you factor in self-employment taxes, buying your own health insurance, no paid time off, and inconsistent income month to month. What about the future? Projections suggest that maintaining middle-class status will require even higher incomes as costs continue to outpace wage growth. Some economists predict that by 2030, middle-class households will need to earn between $60,000 and $160,000, adjusted for inflation, just to maintain current standards of living. The treadmill keeps speeding up. So where does this leave you? Understanding these numbers isn't about feeling discouraged, it's about having an honest assessment of where you actually stand so you can make informed decisions. If you're making less than you thought middle class required, you're not failing. The benchmarks have shifted dramatically. If you're making more but still feel financially stressed, you're not crazy. The cost of middle-class life has genuinely increased beyond what incomes have kept pace with. The real conversation we should be having isn't just about the numbers. It's about what kind of life those numbers can actually buy, what financial security really looks like today, and how we can build wealth and stability in an economic environment that's fundamentally different from previous generations. Understanding the real middle-class salary numbers is just the starting point for having honest conversations about money, expectations, and building the life you actually want, rather than the ones social media or outdated definitions tell you that you should have. The truth is, middle class isn't really about a specific salary number anymore. It's about your relationship with money, your financial stability, your ability to handle emergencies, and whether you're building toward long-term security or just treading water. Those factors matter infinitely more than whether you fit into some statistical category that economists created. The real question isn't, are you middle class, but are you building the financial life that gives you security, options, and peace of mind? That's the conversation worth having, and it starts with knowing the real numbers instead of the myths we've all been told.